The sniper pressed his eye to the scope and exhaled slowly. Across the street, through the tall glass windows of Caruso's Italian restaurant, Vincent Callahan sat at his private table like a king who had never once feared his own kingdom. He was laughing at something, one of his men said, relaxed. Unaware, the crosshair settled on the center of his chest. The shooter's finger found the trigger. 1 pound of pressure. That was all it would take to end the most feared man on the East Coast. And then a woman came out of nowhere and kissed him. If you've ever had a single moment in your life, one split second where you made a choice you could never take back, then you already understand exactly what this story is about. Before we go any further, if you're watching this for the first time, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. Every week we bring you stories like this one, dramatic, emotional, and completely unpredictable. Drop a comment below and tell us what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to that moment. The moment Audrey Whitmore destroyed the quiet life she spent 2 years building with one single kiss. The bar didn't have a name worth remembering. That was the point. Audrey Whitmore had chosen it deliberately, a narrow, dimly lit neighborhood pub on the corner of West 44th and 9th Avenue, the kind of place tourists walked past without a second glance and regulars came to because they didn't want to be found. The taps were old. The stools wobbled. The neon Budweiser sign in the window had been flickering since October, and nobody had bothered to fix it. Audrey liked it that way. She had been working the afternoon shift for 14 months. She knew which regulars took their whiskey neat and which ones needed ice to slow themselves down. She knew which ones were lying to their wives about where they were and which ones genuinely had nowhere else to go. She had learned to read people the way other people read menus quickly without thinking, without looking like she was doing it at all. It was a skill her father had taught her. She tried not to think about that. It was a Wednesday, in late October, the kind of afternoon where the city felt compressed, like the sky had been pushed too low. Audrey was pulling a draft for a guy in a cable-knit sweater who came in every week and never told her his name when she looked up through the bar's front window, out of simple habit, the same unconscious sweep she did every few minutes, not looking for anything in particular. And then she saw it. Across the street, 3rd floor of the abandoned building that had been boarded up since a fire 2 summers ago. A shape in the darkness behind the broken window, a glint of something metal, catching what little light came through. Her body knew before her brain caught up. She set the glass down. The man in the cable-knit sweater said something she didn't hear it. Her eyes had already tracked, left to the Italian restaurant across the street. Caruso's. White tablecloths. Quiet money. The kind of place where conversations happened that never showed up anywhere in writing. She saw the table near the window. 4 men. Private corner. A bottle of something expensive nobody was actually drinking. And at the center of it, a man in a dark suit, salt and pepper hair cut close to his skull, a jaw like something carved rather than grown. He was leaning back in his chair with the specific kind of ease that came not from comfort, but from the absolute certainty that the world would wait for him. Audrey recognized that posture. She had grown up around men who sat like that. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't need to. She already knew what he was, what the glint in that 3rd floor window meant, and exactly how many seconds she had before the angle became clean. She was already moving. She didn't grab her jacket. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. She came out from behind the bar and went straight through the door and across the street without looking for traffic, and a yellow cab leaned on its horn as it swerved around her. But she didn't break stride. The doorman at Caruso's started to straighten when he saw her coming, her bar apron still tied around her waist, hair falling out of its knot, the particular look on her face that made people step aside before they consciously decided to. She went past him without stopping. Inside, the restaurant was all muted gold light and the smell of garlic and old money. A hostess said something. Audrey walked through her like she wasn't there. She saw the table. The man in the dark suit turned his head at the disturbance. There was a half second where his eyes found her and calculated everything about her in a single sweep, the way dangerous men do, Threat assessment, so practiced it happened beneath thought. His hand had moved toward the inside of his jacket before he even processed what he was seeing. Audrey crossed the space between them in 4 steps, put one hand on his shoulder, and kissed him. Not a peck, not something that could be dismissed or laughed off. She kissed him, the way a woman kisses a man she has been waiting for, with her full weight behind it, her hand at the back of his neck, her body angled so that to anyone watching from outside the restaurant, from a 3rd-floor window with a rifle scope, all they would see was the shape of a woman and the obscured outline of a man behind her. The entire restaurant went still. She felt the man's shock in the half-second before his training took over. His body had gone rigid. Both hands had come up, not to push her away, but to contain the situation while his mind caught up. One of his men had scraped his chair back. She heard the sound of a hand going beneath a jacket. She broke the kiss. She was close enough to his ear that she didn't have to raise her voice. 3rd floor of the building across the street, she said. Broken window, left corner. You have maybe 90 seconds before he repositions. She stayed exactly where she was, her back to the window, her body between him and the angle. The man didn't move for a moment. Then he said quietly to one of the men at the table a single word she didn't catch, and she felt the table shift as 2 people stood and moved without hurry, the way trained men move when they don't want to cause a panic. She stepped back. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized from her childhood. It was the expression men wore when they encountered something they hadn't planned for and weren't sure if it was an asset or a threat. "Sit down," he said. "It wasn't a request." "I don't work for you," Audrey said. "No," he said, "but you just made yourself my problem. So sit down." She sat, not because he told her to, because her legs had started shaking, and she'd be damned if she'd let him see that while she was standing. His name was Vincent Callahan. She found this out 40 minutes later, after 2 of his men came back and exchanged looks with him across the table that said everything had been handled, and after a 3rd man appeared at her elbow and set a glass of water in front of her that she didn't ask for. The restaurant had gone back to its quiet murmur. The staff were doing the particular performance of normalcy that people do when they are trying very hard to pretend nothing happened. Vincent Callahan had not taken his eyes off her. "You want to tell me how you spotted something my security detail missed?" he said. He asked it the way people ask questions they already have 3 theories about. "Your detail was watching the street," Audrey said. "Wrong angle, and you were watching the building. I was looking out the window from a bar across the street. I work there." He looked at her for a long moment. "One of the men at the table," he said, with a broken nose that had healed slightly wrong, had his phone out and was doing something on it with the particular focus of someone running a search. "Audrey Whitmore," the man said, without looking up from the phone. Something shifted in Vincent Callahan's face. It was small, a compression at the corners of his eyes, a stillness that replaced the calculation that had been there a second before. She couldn't read it. That bothered her more than she expected. "You can go," Vincent said to the other men. Nobody moved. I said, "Go." The table cleared. The broken-nosed man hesitated for a half-second longer than the others, and Vincent looked at him once, and he left. They were alone at the table, with the untouched, expensive bottle between them. "Your father," Vincent said, "told me you had your mother's instincts." The glass of water was halfway to her mouth. She put it down. "You knew my father. I knew Richard Whitmore for 22 years. He said it like a fact that came with a weight he was tired of carrying. We built something together, before you were old enough to understand what that meant." Audrey's jaw had gone tight. She could feel it. "He never mentioned you." He wouldn't have. That was the arrangement. What arrangement? Vincent reached for the bottle of wine, the one nobody had touched, and poured 2 glasses without being asked. He slid one toward her. She didn't touch it. "Your father knew, when he made the choices he made, that there would eventually be a cost," Vincent said. "He also knew that he didn't want you to be the one paying it. So he asked me 2 years before he died to make sure that certain things didn't follow you." Audrey heard the words. She processed them. She didn't like what they assembled into. "You've been watching me," she said. "Not personally. That's supposed to make it better?" He looked at her steadily. "It's supposed to make it accurate." She pushed her chair back. I want to leave. You can leave, he said immediately, which surprised her. She had expected an argument, a hand on her arm. The particular brand of control these men used so smoothly, you almost didn't notice it happening. Nobody is stopping you. But there's something you should know before you do. She stopped. The man in that building, Vincent said, wasn't sent by a competitor. He wasn't a new player making a move or someone outside my organization looking for an opening. He paused. The order came from inside. Audrey looked at him. Someone I trusted, he said, and his voice was perfectly flat, the kind of flat that only came from a long practice of not letting things show. Which means I have a problem I don't yet understand the shape of. And you looked at her, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that wasn't calculation or authority or control. Something that looked very close to reluctant honesty. You just made yourself visible to whoever gave that order. The room felt smaller than it had 60 seconds ago. I don't want any part of this, Audrey said. I know, Vincent said. Your father didn't want you to have any part of it either. And you still ended up here. She stood up from the table. Her hands were steady, she made sure of that. She untied the bar apron from her waist and folded it over her arm, because it gave her hands something to do, and because she had learned from her father that small, ordinary gestures were sometimes the only, not thing that kept the panic from showing on your face. She walked toward the door. She made it 4 steps before Vincent said, behind her, without raising his voice, he watched every birthday, Audrey, every single one. He never missed one. She stopped. She didn't turn around. Her father had been dead for 2 years. She had stood at his grave in the rain on a Tuesday and felt nothing, or told herself she felt nothing, which was not the same thing but was close enough to get through the day. She stood in the middle of Caruso's Italian restaurant with her bar apron folded over her arm and her pulse knocking on hard against the inside of her wrist, and she thought about a man she had spent 2 years trying to stop thinking about. She turned around. Vincent Callahan was watching her. He hadn't moved. He was sitting very still at the table, the way her father used to sit still. When he was saying something, he wanted to make sure she heard completely before he said anything else. Sit down, Vincent said again. This time it was different. This time it almost sounded like he was asking. She sat down. Outside the window, across the street, the 3rd-floor window of the abandoned building was empty. The light was already going gray, the city grinding forward with its usual indifference. Somewhere in there, 2 men were taking care of a situation that Audrey had interrupted by instinct and would now have to reckon with by choice. She picked up the glass of wine. She still didn't drink it. But she stayed, and that the staying was the moment everything she had built in the last 2 years began, quietly and irrevocably, to come apart. The wine glass was still full when Vincent's phone buzzed against the table. He didn't look at it right away. He was watching Audrey the way she'd noticed. He watched everything not with urgency, but with the patient attention of someone who had learned that the thing you look away from is usually the thing that kills you. Then he picked it up, read whatever was on the screen, and set it face down. They found the nest, he said. Rifle was still there. Man wasn't. Audrey absorbed that. He ran, or he was pulled. Vincent's jaw tightened for half a second, then relaxed. There's a difference. If he was pulled, someone made a call the moment things went wrong. Yes, which means they know it didn't work. Yes. She looked at him. And they know someone interfered. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. Audrey set her untouched glass back on the table and pressed her fingers flat against the white tablecloth and thought about the apartment she had gone back to every night for 14 months. 3rd floor walk-up on West 46th, 1 bedroom, a window that faced a brick wall. She had chosen it because it had 2 exits, and because the landlord didn't ask questions, and because it was the most aggressively ordinary place she could find in a city that was never ordinary. She thought about how ordinary it didn't feel anymore. I need to go home, she said. I'll have someone take you. I don't need an escort. That wasn't what I said. Vincent looked at her steadily. I'll have someone take you. You can tell them to wait in the car. You can tell them to go to hell, but they're going to be there. She wanted to argue. The part of her that had spent 2 years building a life that belonged entirely to herself wanted to stand up, walk out, and make a point out of it. But there was another part older, quieter, trained into her before she was old enough to know she was being trained, and that part was already calculating exits and angles and the particular silence of a city that had just been reminded it was dangerous. She didn't argue. The car was a black Escalade with tinted windows and a driver who didn't introduce himself. One of Vincent's men rode in the passenger seat and didn't look back at her once during the 12-minute drive. When they pulled up in front of her building, she got out without saying anything. She heard the engine stay running behind her as she went inside. In her apartment, she stood in the middle of the living room with her coat still on and her keys still in her hand and breathed. The place looked exactly as she had left it that morning. Coffee mug by the sink. Her second-hand copy of a Spanish-language cookbook open on the counter that she'd been using to learn recipes she never quite finished making. The small, deliberate, carefully assembled evidence of a person living a quiet life. She sat down on the edge of her bed and put her face in her hands. Her father had been watching her birthdays. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know where to put it. Richard Whitmore had sent her away at 22 with $40,000 in cash, a new identity that she'd chosen not to fully use because she wasn't ready to erase herself completely, and the specific emotional brutality of a man saying, "I love you," by never saying it at all. She had grieved him in the only way she knew how, by not grieving him, by getting up every morning and pouring drinks for strangers, and telling herself that the life she was living was a choice and not an exile. She took her face out of her hands. She went to the window and looked down at the street and saw the Escalade 20 feet from her building entrance, engine still running, exactly where she'd left it. She went to bed. She didn't sleep. Vincent Callahan's office was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown that presented itself as a private equity firm to anyone who didn't know better. The lobby was real legitimate staff, legitimate clients, a CFO who genuinely believed he worked for a financial services company. The 14th floor was something else. At 11:45 that night, Vincent stood at the window with his hands in his pockets and looked at the city. Behind him, 3 men were arranged around the conference table. Marcus Webb, his head of security, a former Army Ranger, who had been with him for 9 years and who communicated primarily in clipped sentences and meaningful silences. Danny Cho, his intelligence coordinator, 26 years old and built like a middleweight fighter who could pull information out of systems that didn't legally exist. And Thomas Riley, his consigliere, 61, silver-haired, who had known Vincent's father before Vincent was born, and who had the specific gravity of a man who had survived every kind of disaster by refusing to panic about any of them. "Talk," Vincent said, still looking at the window. Marcus went first. Rifle was Accuracy International AXMC. Modified. Serial number removed cleanly, professional work, not aftermarket. The nest had been set up at least 24 hours in advance, which means he had access to the building for 24 hours. "Before I arrived," Vincent said. "Which means he knew my schedule." Nobody said anything. Vincent turned around. "Who knew I was going to be at Caruso's today?" Thomas said. Damien knew. The name landed in the room and stayed there. Damien Blackwood, Vincent's brother-in-law, his sister Elena's husband, before Elena died of cancer 4 years ago. A man who had been inside the organization for 12 years, who sat in rooms where almost nothing was written down and almost everything was said out loud because it was safer that way, who had been trusted with the kind of information that trust like that was built over a decade to protect. "You're saying Damien ordered this," Vincent said. I'm saying Damien had access," Thomas said carefully. "I'm not saying more than that yet. Danny Cho pulled up something on the laptop in front of him and turned the screen so Vincent could see it from across the table. Damien's financials. "I've been in his accounts for the last 3 hours." He said it the way someone else might say, "I've been reviewing his quarterly reports." 6 weeks ago, he received a transfer of $400,000 from a shell company registered in Malta. The shell company has 3 layers of ownership. I unwrapped 2 of them. The third layer points back to a domestic holding company that I'm still working on. 400,000, Marcus said. That's seed money, Vincent said. That's not a payout. That's a first installment. The room went quiet again, with a different quality to it. Thomas said, "Before we go further with this, I want to say something, and I want everyone to hear it clearly." He waited until he had the room's attention in the particular way that 61 years of earned authority produced. Damien has been with us 12 years. He loved Elena. Whatever he is or isn't, he is not someone we move on based on a financial trail that Danny found in 3 hours. We need more than this. I agree, Vincent said. Marcus looked up. That clearly wasn't what he expected. We watch him, Vincent said. We don't touch him. We don't move on him. We don't let him know we're looking. And we find the third layer. He looked at Danny. How long? 48 hours. Maybe less. Make it less. Vincent pulled out his chair and sat down for the first time since they'd started talking. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. There's something else I need to deal with. The woman from this afternoon. Marcus had a folder on the table. He opened it. Audrey Whitmore. 29. Works at a bar on West 44th called McNally's Draft. Prior to that, no employment record in New York, going back further than 26 months. Before that, he paused. There are records, but they're thin in a way that looks deliberate. Born in Connecticut. Father was Richard Whitmore. Another pause. We all know who Richard Whitmore was. She's his daughter, Thomas said, with a tone that meant he was reassessing several things simultaneously. She spotted a sniper from across the street through a bar window, Vincent said. She crossed 4 lanes of traffic and walked through my security detail and positioned herself between me and the angle before any of my people had a clue what was happening. Thomas looked at him. Richard trained her. He did. And she's been working as a bartender. She's been hiding, Vincent said, which she's apparently been very good at, and which she is now significantly worse at, because she made a decision this afternoon that put her on someone's radar. He leaned forward. I made a promise to Richard. I intend to keep it. What kind of promise? Marcus asked. The kind I'm not going to detail in this room, Vincent said, and his voice carried the specific finality that closed conversations. What I need from you is a threat assessment on her location and a low-profile security arrangement that she won't notice immediately and will probably figure out within a day. Marcus almost smiled. Understood. She noticed it within 6 hours. It was barely 7 in the morning when Audrey came out of her building and clocked the man on the opposite corner before she'd made it 4 steps down the sidewalk. Medium height. Relaxed posture that was too deliberate. Coffee cup he hadn't drunk from in the 11 minutes she'd been watching him from her window before she came down. She walked straight to him. He looked startled for exactly 1 second before his face went neutral. You need better tradecraft, she said. He opened his mouth. Tell whoever's watching that I'm going to my bar to pick up my shifts and figure out how to explain to my boss why I walked out yesterday. And tell them I'll do a lot better cooperating if I'm not being followed by someone who holds a coffee cup like a prop. She walked away. Her phone rang 20 minutes later. She already knew who it was. You burned my guy in 6 hours, Vincent said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite amusement but was adjacent to it. He was holding the cup wrong, she said. What do you want? I want to meet. Today, I have a job. Your job is secondary to your being alive, which is currently a situation that requires some active management. Stopped on the sidewalk and let the morning foot traffic move around her and pressed her free hand against her sternum because her chest had gone tight in a way she recognized and hated. You don't know that I'm in danger, she said. You don't know they even know who I am. I know that someone inside my organization ordered a professional hit and that you publicly intervened, and that professionals in this business are very thorough about understanding what went wrong when something goes wrong. A pause. Do you want me to keep going? She didn't answer. Noon, he said. I'll send an address. He hung up before she could object. She stood on the sidewalk with her phone in her hand and a feeling in her chest that she hadn't felt since she was 22 and standing outside her father's house for the last time with a bag over her shoulder and nowhere she was allowed to go back to. She hated that feeling. She went to the bar anyway. Her boss, a red-faced Irishman named Colin, who had hired her without asking too many questions because she could pull a clean pint and didn't steal from the register, looked at her from behind the bar when she came in and said, "I'm not going to ask." "Good," Audrey said. "You all right?" "I don't know yet." Colin nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. He poured her a coffee without being asked and set it on the bar. She sat on a stool and drank it, and stared at the bottles behind the bar and tried to think clearly. Her father had kept tabs on her. Then Vincent Callahan had been watching over her for 2 years without her knowledge. Someone had tried to kill Vincent, and that someone was probably inside his own organization, and she had now made herself visible by doing the one thing her instincts had told her to do, without consulting the part of her brain that was supposed to be running her life these days. She thought about what her father used to say when she was 12 years old and couldn't sleep because she'd overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. The difference between surviving and not surviving is whether you see the problem before the problem sees you. She had seen the problem. She just hadn't expected the problem to know her name. The address Vincent sent was a restaurant in Chelsea that looked closed from the outside and wasn't. She arrived 3 minutes before noon and was escorted through a kitchen that smelled of roasting garlic to a back with a single table, 2 chairs, and a man who looked like he hadn't slept any more than she had. Vincent Callahan in daylight was different from Vincent Callahan under the gold lighting of Caruso's. The lines in his face were deeper. The gray in his hair was more visible. That sound. He was 44 years old. She had established from the extremely brief internet research she'd done at 7 in the morning that had returned almost nothing. And he looked like a man who had spent those 44 years doing things that left marks. There was another man in the room, the silver-haired one she didn't know yet, who stood against the wall with a cup of coffee and a neutral expression. "This is Thomas Riley," Vincent said. "He's been with my family longer than I have." Thomas nodded at her. She nodded back. "Sit down," Vincent said. "You keep saying that. You keep making me say it." She sat down. Vincent slid a manila folder across the table. She opened it. Inside were printed pages, financial records. She recognized the format and a photograph of a man she didn't know. Late 40s, broad, dark hair going silver at the temples, the specific kind of physically imposing that came from decades of maintenance rather than natural build. "Damien Blackwood," Vincent said. "My brother-in-law." She looked up. "He's been with me for 12 years. He was married to my sister." Something crossed his face and disappeared. "She died 4 years ago." "I'm sorry," Audrey said, and meant it. "He has been receiving payments from a source we haven't fully identified yet. Payment started 6 weeks ago. Yesterday's attempt was Vincent stopped." She watched him choose his next words with a care that told her this was costing him something. "We believe he arranged it." "You believe," Thomas said from the wall quietly. "We believe it with 48 hours of evidence," Vincent said, and looked at Thomas with a directness that closed that part of the conversation. He looked back at Audrey. "I'm telling you this because you're in this now, regardless of whether you want to be. Someone tried to kill me. You intervened. If Damien is behind it, his people will have identified you by now." Audrey looked at the photograph again. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing," Vincent said. She looked up. "I need you to be somewhere safe while we finish what we need to finish. I need you to not be in your apartment on West 46th, and not at McNally's draft, and not anywhere you've been in a routine for the past 2 years. You want me in a safe house. I want you alive. The safe house is the method." She closed the folder. "I'm not going to sit in a room and wait." "Audrey, I'm not." She pushed the folder back toward him. "You told me last night that my father trained me. You said it like it meant something. And now you want to put me in a room." She shook her head. "My father didn't train me to sit in rooms." Thomas made a sound from the wall. Not a laugh, something more measured than that. Vincent looked at him, and Thomas looked back at the wall. "What did your father train you to do?" Vincent asked. "Exactly what I did yesterday," she said. "Read a situation. Make a fast call act." She met his eyes. "I spent 2 years pretending that wasn't in me. Yesterday it came out because I didn't have time to talk myself out of it." She paused. "I don't want to talk myself out of it anymore." The room was quiet for a moment. Vincent looked at her for a long time. She had the uncomfortable sense that he was not just seeing her, but seeing her father, seeing the angle of her jaw or the flatness of her voice. When she was scared and covering it, the particular competence that got trained into certain people so early, it looked like personality. There are things happening inside my organization, he said carefully, that I need to understand before I can make any decisions about how to handle them. While I'm trying to understand them, I cannot also be managing the risk to your safety and responding to everything else. You following me? You're saying I complicate things. I'm saying you're a variable I can't control. Good, she said. Variables are harder to plan around than targets. Thomas, from the wall, said, "She's not wrong." Vincent looked at him again. Thomas looked at the ceiling. "You stay close," Vincent said. "Not because I'm protecting you, because I know what you can do, and I'd rather have it on my side than unaccounted for." He said it like he'd reasoned his way to a decision he wasn't entirely comfortable with. "But you do not move without telling me first. You do not take action without." "I'll tell you first," she said. "When there's time." "When there's time," he repeated. "You trained your people the same way," she said. "Don't pretend you didn't." He didn't pretend. They spent the next 2 hours going through what Thomas and Vincent had. The financial records, the surveillance on Damien, careful, distant, nothing that would spook him. The timeline of the last 6 weeks that Danny Cho had reconstructed from phone records and movement patterns and 3 different cameras outside 3 different buildings. What the timeline showed was a man who had started meeting someone new 6 weeks ago. The meetings were always in public, always brief, always at locations that would look coincidental on paper. Coffee shops, a park bench, the lobby of a hotel in Midtown where Damien had no apparent reason to be. "He's being handled," Audrey said, looking at the timeline. "Someone is running him." "What do you mean?" Marcus Webb said. He had arrived midway through the same heavy-set man she'd seen at Caruso's, the one with the badly healed nose, who had looked at his phone and said her name and upended everything. "These meetings," she said. "The pattern. Short, public, dispersed locations. He's not meeting a partner. He's meeting a handler." She looked up. "Someone is using him. He's not the top of this." The men looked at each other. "She's right," Danny Cho said from the corner, where he'd been quiet for an hour. He pulled his laptop around. "I've been trying to track who he's communicating with, and the communications don't originate from Damien's end. They come to him," he responds. "He doesn't initiate." "He's following instructions," Vincent said slowly. "He's following instructions," Audrey confirmed, which means the question isn't just who paid him. It's who gave the orders. The room shifted. Not physically, nobody moved. But there was a change in the quality of attention, the way a current shifted in water. "The third layer," Vincent said to Danny. "I'm close," Danny said. "I need tonight. You have tonight." They broke up the meeting at 2:30 in the afternoon. Thomas lingered, pouring himself the last of the coffee, and looked at Audrey with the appraising expression of a man who had seen a lot of people in high-pressure situations and was quietly categorizing her. "Your father came to Vincent a month before he died," Thomas said, not looking at her. She went still. He was sick. He'd known for about 6 months. He didn't tell many people. Thomas drank his coffee. He came to Vincent because there was something he needed to say out loud to someone who would understand what it cost him to say it. He paused. He said you were the thing he'd done right, in a life where he hadn't done very much right. She didn't say anything. The tightness in her chest was back, and she concentrated on keeping her breathing even. He also said, Thomas continued, that if you ever ended up back in this world, it wouldn't be because anyone dragged you into it. It would be because you chose it. He looked at her. He said that like it worried him, and like it made him proud. Both at the same time. Audrey nodded once. She didn't trust her voice. Thomas set his coffee cup down. "Don't let anyone make your choices for you," he said. "Including Vincent. He'll try. He does it to everyone. It's not malice, it's just how he's built." He picked up his jacket. "Your father was the only person who ever said no to him and made it stick." He left. She stood alone in the room for a moment. Then her phone buzzed. But she looked at it, A message from an unknown number, which was already wrong because she had not given this number to anyone who didn't already have it. It said, "You should have stayed behind the bar." Her pulse went flat and fast the way it did when her body understood something before her brain processed it. She screenshot the message, typed a quick text to the number Vincent had used to call her that morning, and walked to the door. She opened it. Marcus Webb was standing in the hallway, and his expression when he looked at her face told her that whatever she was feeling was visible. "I got a text," she said, and showed him her phone. He looked at it. Something moved through his expression that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger, and sat somewhere in the tight territory between the two. He took out his own phone and made a call. "We have a problem," he said into it. Then to her, the number, unknown. "Already ran a trace?" "In progress." He was looking at her steadily. "How did they get this number?" "I don't know," she said. "Think," she thought. The number she'd been using for the last 26 months. Bought with cash, registered to a name that didn't exist. Only 6 people had it calling at the bar, her neighbor Mrs. Ferretti, who watered her plants when she traveled, 3 contacts she'd built slowly over 2 years who she trusted, and the number she'd called when her father died to confirm what she already knew. She stopped. The number she'd called when her father died. She had called one person, a woman she'd known as a child, a woman who had been connected to her father's world the way everything from that time was connected loosely, plausibly, deniably, but connected. She had called that number once 2 years ago, and never again. "There's one possibility," she said. Marcus was still on his phone. He held up one finger. "Wait." Vincent's voice came through the phone, audible from where she stood. "Get her out of there," he said. "Now. Don't use the car you came in. Danny, I need you to find that number in the next hour." Thomas, a pause. "Get me everything you have on the 3rd layer. I don't care if it's not finished. I need whatever you have right now." A beat. Then Vincent's voice quieter, and "Someone tell me where Damien is." Danny's voice in the background, and the answer he gave, made Marcus look at Audrey, with an expression she didn't fully understand until he said it out loud. "Damien's gone," Marcus said. "His car's at his house. His phone's at his house." He paused. "He's not." The information assembled itself in Audrey's head with the particular cold speed of a mind trained to make fast assessments in bad situations. Damien hadn't run. Damien had been moved. Whoever was above Damien in this, whoever was running him, whoever had given the order and sent the money and arranged the rifle had decided that Damien was now a liability, which meant the operation was still active, which meant the attempt on Vincent wasn't over, which meant the text she had received was not a warning. It was a message telling her that she had already been found, and that whoever sent it wanted her to know it, which was its own kind of threat, the kind designed to produce fear, or panic, or the specific kind of desperate action that got people killed. She looked at Marcus. "I know where they might take him," she said. Marcus stared at her. "My father had a place," she said. "A building in the Bronx. It looked like a storage facility. It was used for other things." She pushed through the memory she'd been avoiding for 2 years, pulling up details she'd filed away, and tried to bury. "It changed hands when he died. I don't know who has it now. If someone inside is operating from infrastructure they inherited from my father's network, that building is on the list." Marcus was already on the phone again. She heard him relay the information. She heard the address come out of her own mouth. Street she address sent out of loud in 2 years, and it felt like pressing a bruise, like finding a wound she'd thought had healed, and discovering it had only scabbed over. She heard Vincent's voice one more time, brief and final. "Bring her," he said. And that was the moment Audrey Whitmore understood that there was no version of tonight where she went back to her apartment on West 46th, or to McNally's draft, or to the carefully ordinary life she had spent 26 months building brick by careful brick. That life was behind her now, the way a bridge was behind you after it collapsed. Not gone. Exactly, but no longer something you could stand on. She was Richard Whitmore's daughter. She had always been Richard Whitmore's daughter. She followed Marcus out of the room and into whatever came next. The Bronx building looked exactly the way Audrey remembered it. That was the first thing that felt wrong. It should have changed. 2 years of different ownership, different operations, Different hands moving through it should have left some mark, a new lock, a different configuration, something repainted or boarded or broken that hadn't been before. Instead, it sat on the corner of a dead-end industrial block, looking precisely as it had when she was 19 years old. And her father had brought her here to show her, with the specific deliberateness of a man making sure someone understood something, what certain parts of his life actually looked like up close. A 2-story concrete building, loading dock on the south side. 3 cameras visible, probably 2 more, she couldn't see from the street. The kind of reinforced door that didn't advertise what it was reinforced against. Marcus pulled the car, a different car, a nondescript gray Civic that had appeared from somewhere. She tracked to the curb half a block north and killed the lights. He was on the phone again. She had stopped trying to follow the half-conversations. She was looking at the building. 2 people on the loading dock, she said. Probably one on the roof. The camera on the northeast corner is covering the wrong angle. Either it's been moved recently, or whoever set up the external security doesn't know the original sight lines. Marcus ended his call and looked at her. "You've been here before," he said. "Once. I was 19. Your father brought you. He wanted me to know what things were." She didn't look away from the building. He was very specific about that. He didn't want me building a picture in my head that was cleaner than the reality. Marcus sat with that for a moment. Vincent's 10 minutes out. We wait. What if Damien isn't here in 10 minutes? Then we adjust. She didn't argue. She watched the building. The 2 men on the loading dock were doing the specific kind of nothing that meant they were working the careful, deliberate stillness of men who were supposed to look like they weren't paying attention and were paying complete attention. They had been placed there recently. The way they oriented themselves, slightly too aware of the street without looking at it, told her they'd taken their positions within the last hour. "Someone's already inside," she said. "How do you know?" "The dock guards are fresh. They're covering an extraction, not a perimeter." She turned to look at Marcus. "Whoever's in there is getting ready to move. Damien's a loose end. They're not holding him for long." Marcus picked up his phone. Vincent arrived in 8 minutes, not 10, in another car she didn't recognize, with Thomas in the passenger seat and Danny Cho in the back, with a laptop open on his knees. They pulled alongside the Civic, and Marcus got out and went to Vincent's window, and they talked in low voices for 90 seconds. Then Vincent got out of his car and came to hers. He opened the passenger door and crouched down to her eye level, which surprised her. She'd expected him to stand, to look down, to use height the way men in his position habitually did. Instead, he was level with her, his forearms on the doorframe, looking at her with an expression that was stripped of the authority and calculation she'd come to read as his baseline. "Walk me through what you see," he said. She told him. All of it, the cameras, the sight lines, the dock guards, the extraction read, the original layout of the building as she remembered it from a decade ago. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "The original layout," he said. "Is there a secondary exit?" "East side. It was a fire door that was kept unlocked from the inside. My father used it for contingencies. If someone inherited this building and knew what they were doing, they'd know about that door." "Yes. Which means if they're moving Damien out, they might use it." "Might," she said. "If they think the front is compromised. If they don't know we're here yet, they'll use the loading dock. It's faster, and they control it." Vincent looked at the building. He had the focused stillness of a man running calculations fast, and not letting the speed of them show on his face. "Marcus," he said, without looking away from the building, "east side door. 2 people. Quiet. If it opens from the inside before we move, nobody comes through it." Marcus was already moving. "Danny," Vincent said louder, to the other car. Danny's window went down. "Camera feeds are on a local server inside the building. I can loop the northeast camera from here, but it'll take 4 minutes and it'll leave the gap backward that anyone looking at it afterward will spot." "I don't care about afterward," Vincent said. 4 minutes. He stood up and looked at Audrey. "You stay in the car," he said. "Vincent, that is not a negotiation." His voice was not loud and not rough and was completely immovable. "You gave me the building. You gave me the layout. You've done what you came to do. The rest of this is not for you. She looked at him. I know this building. Your people don't. My people are professionals. So am I. No, he said with a directness that was almost careful. You're trained. There's a difference. Professionals have done this enough times that the adrenaline doesn't change their thinking. You haven't done this in 2 years, and you don't know what your thinking is going to do under that kind of pressure. He held her eyes. Neither do I, and I can't afford an unknown in there. She wanted to argue. She had the argument ready. Her body was already building the case, the words assembling themselves from a place in her that had been quiet for 26 months and was now very, very awake. But she also knew, from the specific education her father had given her, that the argument she most want to make in a high-stakes situation was usually the argument she should examine hardest before she made it. She stayed in the car. It was the hardest thing she'd done in 2 years, and she was intensely aware, sitting in the gray Civic in the dark, with her hands flat on her thighs and her pulse doing something uncomfortable, that fact said something about her that she wasn't ready to fully look at. She watched the building. 4 minutes passed. The northeast camera went still, she could tell, from the way the loading dock guards' behavior shifted, one of them glancing up at the camera position without meaning to, the specific micro-tell of someone who'd been told to watch for a signal and had just registered it. They knew the camera had been interfered with. She pulled out her phone and typed fast. Your camera loop triggered their internal alert. They know something's wrong. They'll move in the next 2 minutes from the east door. She sent it to the number Vincent had called her from that morning and did not wait for a response and got out of the car. She went east. The east side of the building was a narrow alley between the concrete wall and a chain-link fence that backed onto a vacant lot. No lights. She moved along the fence line with her back to it, keeping the building wall in her sightline. She could hear not much. The city absorbed sound out here, but she could feel the particular quality of activity inside a building, the vibration through concrete that meant people moving with purpose. She found the fire door. Marcus and one of Vincent's other men were positioned 15 feet from it on either side, pressed back into the shadow of the alley. Marcus saw her, and his expression went through several things in rapid succession, ending on something that was not quite surprise because he'd probably been expecting this. She pointed at the door. She held up 2 fingers, then 3. She didn't know how many were inside. She was making an assessment. She pointed at her eyes. Then at the gap under the door, a thin line of light was visible, which meant people with flashlights or portable lighting, which meant they were already in motion. Marcus nodded once. He shifted his position by 3 inches. Small adjustments. The door opened from the inside. 2 men came through fast, and Damian Blackwood was between them with his hands bound in front of him, and a blindfold that had been pushed up onto his forehead, probably so he could walk without stumbling. He looked like he hadn't slept. His left eye was swollen, mostly shut. There was dried blood on his chin from a cut on his lower lip that hadn't been treated. 2 men with him were not men, she recognized. They registered Marcus and the other man in the same half-second, and everything happened fast and close and loud, and then it was over. The way these things always were, the build-up was slow, and the event itself was nothing, a handful of seconds. And then there were 2 men on the ground, and Damian was on his knees breathing hard, through his mouth, with his bound hands pressed against his thighs. Audrey came out of the shadow of the fence. Damian looked up and saw her. Something went through his face that she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't relief. It wasn't fear. It was something closer to a man seeing a thing he had hoped he wouldn't have to see. Richard's daughter, he said. His voice was rough, like he'd been talking or shouting for a long time. Where's the person who gave you the order? Marcus said. Not a question. Damian looked at him, then back at Audrey, then at the ground. Damian. Marcus's voice dropped to something very quiet. There are about 30 seconds before Vincent comes around that corner. You want to have this conversation with him or with me? Damian closed his eyes. Inside, he said. She's still inside. The word she landed in the alley like something physical. Audrey felt it in her sternum. Marcus and she looked at each other for one sharp second, And then Marcus was on his radio, and she was already thinking about the internal layout of the building, the ground floor, the office space near the north entrance, the back room her father had used for meetings that required a specific kind of privacy. Vincent came around the corner at a pace that was almost but not quite a run, Thomas behind him, and he took in the scene in the alley, the two men on the ground, Damien on his knees, Audrey standing at the fire door, and looked at Marcus. "She's still inside," Marcus said. "Damien," said she. Vincent's face went through something she had not seen on it before. Not fear, he didn't produce fear the way ordinary people did. She was beginning to understand that about him. Something more like the particular devastation of a man who has built a theory about his life and watched a single piece of evidence collapse it. "Damien," he said. "Who?" Vincent said, and his voice was so controlled it was almost worse than if he'd shouted. Damien looked at him for a long moment. His swollen eye was weeping slightly, the lid too tight. His hands in front of him were shaking not from fear, she thought, but from whatever had happened to him in the hours before they arrived. The sustained physical and psychological pressure that made even trained men's bodies start to give out in small ways. "Victoria," Damien said. Vincent didn't move. "Your sister, Vincent." "It's been Victoria." The next 4 minutes were the longest Audrey had experienced since the night her father died. Vincent stood completely still in the alley for 3 seconds after Damien said the name. 3 full seconds, which in this context was an enormous amount of time, was a measure of how far the information had to travel before it landed. Then he said, "Get him up," and walked to the fire door and went inside. Audrey followed him. Nobody told her to stay back this time. The inside of the building smelled like concrete dust and old motor oil and the particular staleness of a space that got used, but never aired out. Vincent moved through it like he knew where he was going, which meant someone had given him a layout, or he had been here before, or both. He went past the loading area and through a metal door into the corridor that ran north toward the office space. Thomas, at her shoulder, said quietly, "Victoria is Vincent's younger sister. She's been nominally outside the organization. For years, Vincent kept her out deliberately. She handles legitimate family assets, real estate, some retail. Clean money. She was never actually out," Audrey said. "Apparently not." The door at the end of the corridor was closed. Light showed under it, the same kind of portable lighting she'd clocked from the alley, too bright and too focused. Vincent stopped in front of it. He put his hand flat against it for a moment, not pushing, just stopping. Then he opened it. The room was maybe 30 feet square. A table in the center with a lamp on it, filing boxes stacked against the far wall. A woman standing near the table who turned when the door opened. Victoria Callahan was 38 years old, and she looked like Vincent in the way that siblings sometimes looked alike from certain angles, the same jaw, the same dark eyes, the same quality of having been built for something specific. But where Vince's face had been worn into its current shape by decades of external pressure, Victoria's had been shaped by something internal and long-sustained. She looked like a person who had been holding a particular thought for a very long time and was now almost relieved to stop holding it. She was holding a phone in one hand and a device Audrey didn't immediately recognize in the other, small, cylindrical, with a single button on its flat top. Audrey recognized it 3 seconds later, a remote detonator. Her eyes went immediately to the filing boxes along the wall. Not boxes. She understood now, or not only boxes. She could smell it from here, a chemical smell masked by the concrete and the oil, but present, distinct. The particular compound she'd been taught to recognize at an age when most girls were being taught to bake. "Victoria," Vincent said. His voice was different. She had heard it authoritative, careful, closed, briefly honest. She had not heard it the way it sounded. Now like something had been removed from it, the way you removed a key structural piece from a building, and the whole thing shifted without quite falling. "Vince," Victoria said. She said it with the specific intimacy of a nickname, a sister name, and it was somehow worse than anything else she could have said. "Put it down," he said. "I don't think so." She looked at the detonator in her hand. "I've had this conversation in my head 100 times, and in most versions of it, you walk in here and I put it down because you say something that makes it unnecessary." But I don't think that version is real, actually. I think you're going to walk in here and say, put it down, and I'm going to say no, and then we're both going to say the things we've been not saying for about 15 years. Victoria, you cut me out, she said, and her voice went hard and flat, and it was not a complaint. It was a statement of record. I watched you build something, and you cut me out of it. I was 22 years old, and I was smarter than 3/4 of the men you had in that room, and you looked at me and decided I was the one who needed to be protected. You did need to be protected. From what? From this, he said. His voice cracked slightly on the second word, not broken, but stressed, the way a material sounds when it's been put under more weight than it was designed for. From exactly this, from standing in a room like this one, holding something like that. You never asked me, she said. You made the decision, and you built the wall, and you never once asked what I wanted. She looked at him steadily. Do you know what it's like to watch the thing you were built for from the outside? For 15 years? The room was very still. Audrey was standing 2 feet behind Vincent's left shoulder. She could see Thomas in her peripheral vision near the door. She could see the detonator in Victoria's hand, and the distance between Victoria and the table, and the particular way. Victoria was holding the device, not with a finger on the button, not yet, but with a readiness that was more than just holding it for show. She was counting exits. She was reading the weight distribution of the boxes. She was running the geometry of the room. Her father's voice in her head, clear as a recording, when someone is holding a trigger, the only thing that matters is what they need before they use it. Find the need. Give them somewhere to put it that isn't the button. What do you want to happen next? Audrey said. Everyone looked at her, including Victoria. I'm not him, Audrey said, speaking directly to Victoria. I'm not one of his people. I'm nobody in this room. She kept her voice even, and her hands visible at her sides. So I'm asking straight, what do you want to happen after this? What does this look like when it works? Victoria stared at her. Who are you? Audrey Whitmore. Richard Whitmore's daughter. Something shifted in Victoria's face. Flicker of something that wasn't quite surprise. More like recognition of a name she'd heard in a different context, assembling itself into a new shape. He talked about you, Victoria said. A lot of people seem to know things about me that I didn't know, Audrey said. Right now, I'm asking about you. What do you want, Victoria? Not what you're angry about. Not what you've been planning for 6 weeks. What do you actually want when this is over? It was the right question, or it was the completely. There was no middle. She knew that. Either it opened something or it didn't. It didn't. Victoria's face closed down. I want to not be invisible anymore, she said, and pressed the button. The blast was not the explosion Audrey had prepared her for. It was smaller, deliberate, controlled, a charge that had been placed not to destroy the room, but to destroy the filing boxes, the contents, the records that were stored in them. A shockwave of heat and sound and displaced air that knocked Audrey backward into the wall and sent the lamp on the table skittering into the corner and filled the room with smoke and particulate. She hit the wall and slid down it and landed on her hands and knees on the concrete floor. The ringing in her ears was immediate and total. She breathed in smoke and coughed it out and pushed herself to her feet before she consciously decided to stand up. Vincent was down. Not unconscious, she could see him moving, one hand on the floor, already pushing up. Thomas was in the doorway, coughing upright. The room was full of gray smoke and the orange glow of burning paper. Victoria was gone. Audrey crossed to the far wall, the east wall, opposite the boxes, and found the secondary door she'd identified from the room's geometry the moment they'd walked in. It was open. A cold draft was coming through it. She went through it without stopping. The secondary door opened into a narrow service passage that ran along the back of the building and came out into the vacant lot behind the chain-link fence. She pushed through it into the cold night air and stopped. The vacant lot was empty. A vehicle, she could hear it, already half a block away, moving fast without headlights. She stood in the vacant lot with her ears ringing and her palms scraped from the concrete floor and the cold air coming in hard, and looked at the direction the sound had gone. Victoria Callahan had just destroyed the only physical evidence they'd had. She had slipped, slipped through a door they hadn't covered because they hadn't had enough people, and she had gotten into a vehicle that had been waiting, which meant she had a contingency plan for this specific scenario, which meant she had planned for the possibility of being found. She had planned for everything. Audrey went back inside. Vincent was on his feet when she came through the service passage door. Thomas had his jacket off and was holding it against a cut on his forearm that was bleeding steadily but not badly. The smoke was beginning to thin. The boxes were destroyed, blackened, and still smoking, nothing recoverable. Vincent looked at her when she came in. She shook her head. She watched something go through his face that was different from everything she'd seen on it before. Not the controlled stillness, not the calculation. This was a man absorbing multiple simultaneous blows, his sister's betrayal, the destruction of evidence, the escape, and doing it without anyone to show it to. She felt unexpectedly and inconveniently something that was not sympathy, exactly, but was close enough to it to be uncomfortable. "The detonator," she said. She had it ready. She knew we were coming. "Yes," Vincent said. She had a vehicle waiting outside. She planned for the contingency of being found and trapped. "Yes. Which means she's not done," Audrey said. "She didn't come here to finish. She came here to destroy the records and get out. The records were the point." Vincent looked at the burned boxes. "What was in them?" she said. Silence. "Vincent, what was in the boxes?" He looked at her. He looked at Thomas. Thomas gave him a slight nod. The nod of a man saying, "She's already in it. There's no point now." "Financial records," Vincent said, "going back 12 years. The kind that showed where money came from and where it went. My money, my organization's money," he paused, "and a number of other things that could be used. If someone wanted to use them," she understood. She wasn't just building a case against you. She was building leverage. Yes, and she needed to destroy it before we got to it. Because if you had it, you could use it against her as much as she could use it against you. "Yes, so she burned it," Audrey said, "which means neither of you has it anymore. Which means she worked through it. The play she's been building collapses unless she has copies somewhere else." Vincent was looking at her with full attention. "Does she have copies?" Audrey said. Damien appeared in the doorway, Marcus behind him, his hands no longer bound. He looked at the burned boxes, and his face did something complicated, and then went still. "She has copies," Damien said. He said it like a man who had been holding information for a long time, and had just decided to stop. "She has copies of everything. She's been building the file for 3 years. This," he gestured at the boxes. "This wasn't the source. This was the decoy." The word decoy landed in the room, and what it meant assembled itself in Audrey's mind with a speed that was almost nauseating. The meeting in the building, the detonator, the dramatic exit through the fire door, the vehicle waiting in the lot, all of it had been staged. Not Victoria's anger that was real. Audrey could still feel the specific heat of real pain in the things Victoria had said then. But the performance of it, the positioning, the choice to trigger the blast rather than run the moment they'd come through the door. She had needed them in this room, distracted, focused on the fire and the escape, while something else happened, somewhere else. "Where are the copies?" Vincent said to Damien, and his voice was very quiet now, the specific quiet that was worse than any volume. Damien looked at the floor. "She has a man, someone who handles her legitimate real estate accounts. She's been feeding him copies for 3 years, slowly, one piece at a time, and he's been holding them." He paused. "His name is Gerald Price. He operates out of a firm in Midtown. If she gets to him tonight, she hands everything to someone outside the organization," Thomas said. He had put his jacket back on over the bleeding arm without commenting on it. "Law enforcement, a competitor, a journalist. It doesn't matter who. Any of them ends Vincent." The room went very quiet. Audrey looked at the burned boxes. She looked at the open service door still swinging slightly on its hinges. She looked at Vincent Callahan, the most feared man on the East Coast, standing in a concrete room in the Bronx with smoke in his hair and his sister's name in his mouth like a wound. And she understood, with the clarity that came from being her father's daughter, exactly what was about to be required. Not from Vincent, not from Marcus or Thomas or Danny Cho. From her, because Victoria didn't know what she knew, which was that Gerald Price's firm in Midtown operated out of a building that her father had owned years ago, before a series of transactions that had looked like legitimate real estate business had transferred it through 3 companies into the hands of a holding entity that she had never fully traced because she had been 22 years old and trying very hard to stop tracing things. She knew which building it was. She knew the layout. And she knew, from the way Victoria had looked at her in this room, the recognition of Richard Whitmore's daughter, the half-second of recalibration that Victoria had not accounted for her. Not really. Not as someone who knew the geography of her father's old world. She was, in this moment, the one variable Victoria had not planned for. She turned to Vincent. "I know where Price's office is," she said. "I know the building." He looked at her, and this time she said, "You don't tell me to stay in the car." He held her gaze for a long moment. The smoke was still hanging in the air between them. His face showed her nothing she could easily read, and everything she needed to understand. "No," he said quietly. The drive to Midtown took 19 minutes. Nobody talked. Marcus drove. Vincent was in the passenger seat with his phone against his ear, talking to Danny in the clipped shorthand of men who had worked together long enough that full sentences were an inefficiency. Audrey sat in the back with Thomas, who had wrapped his arm in a strip of cloth he'd produced from somewhere and was looking out the window with the focused composure of a man who had decided to save his energy for what came next. Audrey watched the city move past the window and ran the building in her head. Price Financial Group occupied the 6th and 7th floors of a 12-story building on West 51st that her father had owned under a holding company called Meridian Property Solutions until approximately 8 years ago, a soundline wood splitting, when a series of transfers she'd tracked at the time and then deliberately stopped tracking had moved it through 2 intermediate entities into what appeared to be a legitimate commercial real estate portfolio. She had been 21 when she'd traced it that far. She'd stopped because her father had found her doing it and had sat across the kitchen table from her and said, very quietly, "Some doors you don't open because you won't like what's behind them, and some doors you don't open because I'm asking you not to." She had never been entirely sure which category that one fell into. Now she was about to find out what was behind it. "The building," she said. 6th and 7th floors. What's the access situation after hours?" Danny's voice came through Vincent's phone, on speaker now. "Security desk in the lobby. 1 guard, maybe 2 after 9 p.m. Elevators require a key card above the 4th floor after business hours. Stairwells are accessible from the lobby, but the door to each floor requires a separate card. There's a service elevator," Audrey said, "on the north side of the building. It was there when my father owned it. It ran from the basement to the roof, and it used a physical key, not a card, because it was original to the building's construction in 1987. Silence on the line. "Danny," Vincent said. "Checking building schematics," Danny said. Keyboard sounds. "She's right. Service elevator, north side. Building permits show it's been maintained, it's operational. Does Price's office have access to it on 6 or 7? 7. There's a service corridor on 7 that connects to the elevator shaft." Vincent lowered the phone and looked at Audrey over his shoulder. "You've never been in this building," he said. It was half statement, half question. "No, but I know how my father built things." She paused. "He always had a secondary way in and a secondary way out. Always. He said the front door was for people who weren't paying attention." Vincent held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to the front. "Danny," he said, "I need you in the building's security system in the next 10 minutes. Not the cameras, the keycard logs. I want to know if Victoria Callahan or anyone connected to her has accessed that building in the last 6 hours." "Working on it," Danny said, and the line went quiet to the sound of someone moving fast through systems they weren't supposed to be in. Thomas said, at Audrey's shoulder, very quietly, "You don't have to go in." "I know," she said. "I know what Vincent will do," she said. "He'll handle it, and maybe that's enough." But Victoria saw me in that building tonight. She knows I was there. She knows I know things about her operation that she didn't plan for. She looked at Thomas. If she gets to Price before we do and hands off those files, Vincent's finished. And then she comes back for the loose ends. Thomas looked at her steadily. I'm a loose end, she said. So is Damien. So is anyone who was in that room tonight. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Your father used to make that same face, he said. When he'd reasoned his way to a decision he didn't entirely want to make. What face? The one that looks like patience but isn't. She looked out the window. The city was bright and indifferent, the way it always was. Pedestrians moving along sidewalks with the specific Manhattan purposefulness that didn't slow down for anything. Danny's voice came back through the phone. Keycard log shows a Callahan Group access card used on the 7th floor at 9:47 p.m. tonight. Callahan Group is one of the legitimate entities Victoria manages. Vincent said, she's already there. She's been there for, Danny calculated, 31 minutes. Marcus said, from the front, without inflection, she's had 31 minutes with Price. Carr went quiet. How long does it take to hand off a file, Audrey said. It wasn't really a question. If she had copies in physical form, it's already done. If it's digital transfer, encryption, confirmation, she's done. Then why is she still there? Vincent said. Nobody answered because nobody knew, and the not knowing sat in the car for the remaining 4 minutes of the drive, like something with weight. Marcus parked on 51st with the engine running. The building was mid-block glass and steel, the lobby lit with the particular cold brightness of buildings that were never fully dark. Audrey could see one security guard at the desk from here, and the suggestion of a second, somewhere behind him. Vincent turned in his seat and looked at the three of them in the back. Marcus and I go through the lobby. Standard, I own the building through a chain that ends somewhere legitimate. Danny can confirm that in the next 2 minutes if he hasn't already, which means I have a right to be here. He looked at Thomas. You stay with the car. If something goes wrong in there, you drive and you don't come back for us. Thomas opened his mouth. That is not a discussion, Vincent said. Thomas closed his mouth. Vincent looked at Audrey. Service elevator. North side. You said you know how he built things. Yes. Then you know the service elevator better than anyone in that building, right now. She understood what he was saying. You want me to come up through the service side. I want you to come up through the service side and get eyes on 7 before Marcus and I come off the main elevator. I want to know what we're walking into. And if she's already gone, then you find Price and you keep him in that office until I get there. And if she hasn't gone and she's still in the office? Vincent held her eyes. Then you do exactly what you did at Caruso's. You read the situation and you make a fast call. He paused. I trust your fast calls. She felt the weight of that in a way she hadn't expected to. She got out of the car. The north side of the building was a service alley with a loading area, and a door marked authorized personnel with a lock that was keyed, not carded, exactly as the schematics had shown. She had a slim toolkit in her jacket pocket. She'd taken it from the Civic's glove compartment when they'd transferred cars, without asking, because it was the kind of thing that got left in operational vehicles, and she'd recognized it for what it was. The lock took her 40 seconds. She was out of practice. She gave herself a moment of honest acknowledgement about that and pushed the door open. The service corridor was cold and fluorescent lit, smelling of cleaning products and the particular neutrality of building infrastructure. She found the elevator shaft, exactly where the plan said it would be north wall, behind a door marked service lift. The physical key was a standard building master format. She pulled a second tool from the kit, 90 seconds. The elevator was old and slow and rattled going up, and she spent the ascent pressed against the back wall with her eyes on the floor indicator, her breathing deliberate and measured, the way her father had taught her when she was 15 years old and couldn't sleep before the school play of all things, which he had treated with the same practical seriousness he treated everything. Control the breath, the rest follows. She controlled the breath. 7 lit up. The service elevator opened into a utility corridor on the 7th floor, exposed pipes, institutional lighting, a cleaning cart parked against one wall, came out slowly, leading with her senses. Sound first. Corridor connected to the main floor through a door at the far end. She heard voices, 2 of them, both female. She moved to the door and pressed her back to the wall beside it and listened. Can't just walk away from this? Victoria's voice. The same register she'd used in the Bronx building, the controlled anger under the surface of it. Everything is already in motion. A second voice, higher, tighter. You said it would be clean. You said nobody would get hurt. Nobody is going to get hurt. Damien is hurt. I saw the pictures you sent. His face. Damien made his choices. You made his choices for him. The second voice was shaking now. Not fear exactly, the specific tremor of someone who had been holding an ethical line for a long time and was watching it be crossed. I agreed to hold documents. I did not agree to whatever happened tonight. You said this was about exposing financials misconduct. It is. Then why do you need to transfer everything tonight? Why tonight? Why the rush? Because the situation changed, Victoria said, and her voice went flat. Because I was found. Because I need the information in safe hands before morning. Silence, Gerald, Victoria said. I need you to complete the transfer. Audrey had heard enough. She had 2 options and about 30 seconds to choose between them. She could go back to the elevator and call Vincent and wait. Or she could go through the door. The transfer had not been completed. Gerald Price, the man Victoria was talking to, was hesitating. That hesitation was the only thing standing between Victoria and achieving everything she'd come for tonight. She went through the door. The office was open plan, dark except for the lights in the glass-walled corner office, at the far end where the voices were. She moved along the wall in the dark, fast and low, her eyes on the lit office, getting the layout. 1 door, glass walls, a desk with 2 monitors, Victoria standing and a man Price, she assumed, late 50s, glasses pushed up on his forehead, the look of a man who had agreed to something 6 months ago that had seemed abstract and was now terrifyingly concrete, seated behind the desk. Victoria's back was mostly to the glass wall. She was focused on Price. Audrey moved to the corner office door. She opened it. Both people inside turned. Victoria Callahan's reaction was immediate and physical. She stepped back and her hand went to her jacket pocket, and Audrey said, very clearly, don't. A beat. I don't have a weapon, Audrey said. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just need you to not complete that transfer, Mr. Price. Price was on his feet. He was looking between them with the expression of a man who had genuinely believed he was helping expose corruption and was only now understanding what kind of room he'd actually walked into. Victoria looked at Audrey with an expression that was cold and assessing, and beneath it she thought something that was almost curious. You followed me here, Victoria said. Yes, from the building in the Bronx. How did you know about Price? Damien told us, Audrey said. She watched that land. He's with Vincent right now. Something shifted in Victoria's face. Not the devastation Audrey expected, something more controlled. More like a woman who has been running contingencies and has just had one of them confirmed. Is he alive? Victoria said. Yes, he's not badly hurt. Victoria's jaw went tight. That's more than he deserved from Vincent. Maybe, Audrey said. But Vincent isn't what you've decided he is. Don't. Victoria's voice went hard. Don't tell me who my brother is. I've watched him for 38 years. I know exactly who he is. You know what he did, Audrey said. That's not the same thing. He cut me out. He was trying to protect you. He did it wrong. He didn't ask you. He made a unilateral decision, and he stuck to it, and he never reconsidered it. She held Victoria's gaze. He's wrong about that. I think you know he's wrong. But trying to destroy him isn't the same as proving it. The room was very quiet. Price had not moved. He was watching them, with the specific stillness of a person who understood that the room's physics did not currently include him. Victoria looked at Audrey for a long moment. Who sent you? Vincent? Nobody sent me. I came up through the service elevator because I know this building's layout, and nobody else's did. She paused. I'm Richard Whitmore's daughter. Your brother made a promise to my father to keep me safe. I've been trying to figure out what I owe in return for that promise, or if I owe anything at all. She kept her voice even. I think what I owe is this conversation. before things go further than they can come back from. Victoria stared at her. You blow this open, Audrey said. Whoever you hand those files to lost law enforcement, a journalist, a competitor, it doesn't just end Vincent. It ends everyone connected to him. Thomas Riley, who's been with your family since before you were born. Damien, who you used and who you apparently still care enough about to ask if he's alive. She paused. It ends you. Because you're in those files too. Whatever you've been doing for the last 3 years, the money you moved, the accounts you built, that's in there. You hand it to someone outside. You hand yourself over with it. Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. She hadn't considered that. Or she had, and she'd decided it was worth it, and hearing it said out loud was making her reconsider this decision she'd already made. The door to the main office opened behind Audrey. Vincent walked through it. He took in the room in one sweep. Price at the desk, Audrey near the door, Victoria in the center of the office, and he stopped. Marcus was behind him, staying back, reading the room the way trained men did, looking for the specific kind of threat that required immediate response and finding something more complicated. Vincent looked at his sister. Victoria looked at her brother. 38 years of everything passed between in about 4 seconds, which was 4 seconds more than Audrey expected, and which told her that whatever had been built between these two people, the resentment, the exclusion, careful, elaborate plan to bring him down, was not actually the whole of it. Under it, there was something older and more snubbers. Vince, Victoria said. Her voice had changed. The flatness was still there, but something under it had shifted. Tori, he said. The nickname was quiet. It cost him something to use it. She looked away first. She looked at the monitors on Price's desk, and the folder of documents beside them, and the drive that Price had been about to plug in when Audrey came through the door. You should have asked me, she said, still not looking at him. 15 years ago. You should have asked. I know, he said. She looked at him sharply. She hadn't expected that. I know, he said again. I made a decision, and I didn't ask you, and I've known for a long time that it was the wrong way to do it. I didn't. He stopped. She watched him work through something. I didn't know how to fix it once it was done. That's not an excuse. It's just what happened. The office was very still. Price slowly, carefully, moved his hand away from the desk and sat back in his chair. Victoria looked at the folder, at the drive, at her brother. I've spent 3 years on this, she said. I know. I was good at it. I know that too, he said. And there was something in his voice that was not patronizing and not managed. It was the specific acknowledgement of one professional recognizing another, and it landed differently than anything else he'd said. Victoria's jaw worked. She was holding herself very still, the specific stillness of a person fighting against a decision they could feel themselves about to make. And then Audrey saw it. The small device in Victoria's left hand, her right hand, had been visible the whole time. The right hand she'd reached toward her jacket pocket. When Audrey came through the door, her left hand, hanging at her side, slightly turned inward. She hadn't seen it in the Bronx because Victoria had been facing the other direction. She hadn't seen it when she came through the office door because Victoria's left side had been angled away. The same cylindrical detonator, a second one. Her eyes went immediately to Price's office, the walls, the furniture, the floor, running the geometry, identifying the objects that were not quite right. Under the desk, she thought, or behind the server stack in the corner. Somewhere that would take out the office, the documents, the drive, everything in the room. Including anyone in the room. She looked at Vincent. He was still looking at his sister. He hadn't seen it. She needed to do something in the next 5 seconds, without alerting Victoria that she'd seen it, without spooking her into using it, and without the thought moved through her with a cold, specific clarity, without creating a situation where Vincent or anyone else in this room got hurt because she moved wrong. She dropped the folder she'd been holding. It was the only thing in her hands. She'd picked it up off the corner of Price's desk when she'd come through the door, without thinking, the way you picked up props when you needed something to do with your hands in a tense situation. She dropped it on the floor between her and Victoria, and it hit the tile with a sharp crack, and in the split second that Victoria's eyes went to it, a reflex. The human startle response, unavoidable, Audrey moved. 3 steps, fast, controlled, every bit of training her father had put into her legs and hands and the particular economic precision of her movement. She got to Victoria's left side, closed both hands around Victoria's left wrist, and applied the specific lock her father had shown her when she was 16 in their kitchen with the radio on, which she had practiced 800 times on a training dummy, and exactly once in the years since on a man who had tried to grab her outside the bar on a Tuesday night in November. Victoria gasped more surprise than pain, her wrist and hand suddenly immobilized, the detonator still in her palm, but her fingers no longer in control of it. Vincent crossed the room in 2 strides. He took the detonator from his sister's hand with a gentleness that was almost painful to witness, careful, precise, like taking something fragile from someone who was already broken enough. Victoria didn't fight. Her body went slack, not the slack of defeat, but the specific release of a person who has been holding an enormous amount of tension for an enormous amount of time and has just been allowed to put it down. She made a sound that wasn't a word. Vincent put the detonator in his jacket pocket and put his hand on the back of his sister's neck, a careful, deliberate gesture, the kind that meant "I have you," in a language older than anything they could have said, out loud, and Victoria Callahan, who had spent 3 years building a plan to destroy her brother and 38 years being angry at him, put her forehead against his shoulder. The room held its breath. Audrey stepped back. She stepped back until she was next to Price's desk, and she turned so she was looking at the window and not at the two of them, because some moments were not meant to have witnesses. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them, both hands, held out in front of her, a slight front affray, a slight tremor in the fingers that she hadn't noticed until the adrenaline started to recede. She pressed them flat on the desk and held them there. "Mr. Price," Marcus said, from the doorway, very quietly. Price looked at him. "The drive," Marcus said. Price looked at the drive on his desk. He looked at Audrey. She looked back at him. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. "I know," she said. "She told me it was about accountability, that there were people who'd never face consequences." "Mr. Price." She kept her voice level, the drive. He picked it up and held it out, and Marcus crossed the room and took it. Behind her, she heard Vincent speak to Victoria in a low voice. She couldn't make out the words, which was right, which was how it should be. She heard his voice and his sister's voice, going back and forth in the specific rhythm of a conversation that had too much history in it and was starting, very slowly, to move through it. She should have felt relieved. She felt exhausted. She felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been running on pure instinct for 12 hours and has just discovered that pure instinct is expensive. Her phone buzzed. Thomas from the car downstairs. "Everything okay?" Typed back, "Yes. Give us 10 minutes." She looked at the window. The city was out there in all its brightness and noise and absolute indifference. The bar she worked at McNally's Draft on West 44th was about 8 blocks north of here. She could Greenwood splitting. She could walk there in 12 minutes. She could go behind the bar and pull a draft for the man in the cable knit sweater and pretend that the last 24 hours had been something she'd dreamed. She knew she wasn't going to do that. She had known since the moment she crossed the street toward Caruso's yesterday afternoon. Maybe she had known longer than that. Maybe some part of her had known the moment she looked up through the bar window and saw the glint of a scope in a dark window and felt something in her chest go sharp and awake, like a door swinging open that she'd spent 2 years leaning against. Audrey, she turned. Vincent was looking at her. Victoria was seated now. Price had quietly vacated his chair, was standing against the wall with the expression of a man hoping very much to become furniture. And Vincent was standing between her and his sister with the specific physical quality of a man who has just gone through something large and is now assessing what comes next. "Are you all right?" he said. The question surprised her. Not the words, but the way he asked it, not as a status check. The way he'd assessed her competence or usefulness in every prior conversation, but with something more direct underneath it. "Yes," she said. "Your hands were shaking. They've stopped." He looked at her for a moment. He looked like he wanted to say something else, and was deciding whether to. "The second detonator," he said. "You saw it." Yes. I didn't. No, he was quiet. How long had you seen it? About 8 seconds before I dropped the folder. 8 seconds, he repeated. Something moved through his expression. What were you doing for 8 seconds? Running the geometry, she said, making sure I didn't do it wrong. He looked at her steadily. She had the sense, not for the first time, of being looked at by someone who was very accustomed to being the most capable person in a given room and was in the process of revising that particular habit. Marcus appeared at Vincent's shoulder. We need to move. The building security is going to notice the service elevator was used and start asking questions. Victoria, Vincent said over his shoulder. Victoria looked up from Price's chair. Her face was tired in a way that went down to the bone. She looked for the first time her actual age. You're coming with me, he said. Not a threat, a statement. I know, she said. We're going to finish this conversation. All of it. Everything you didn't say for 15 years. She looked at him, and then he was quiet for a moment. I don't know yet, he said, and the honesty of it, the specific admission of a man who controlled enormous things, acknowledging that he did not control, this one was more weight than anything else he'd said. Victoria stood up. Price said, from the wall, very quietly, what about me? Marcus looked at him, looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at Audrey, which she hadn't expected. She considered Price, the reading glasses, the folder, the specific look of a man who had started this believing he was the hero of a story about accountability and was ending it understanding he'd been a tool in someone else's plan. He thought he was doing something right, she said. He was used. He doesn't deserve what happens to people who are actually in this. Vincent held her eyes for a moment. Then he looked at Price. You're going to have a conversation with Thomas Riley in the next 48 hours. You're going to tell him everything Victoria told you, everything she gave you, and everything you gave her. And then you're going to forget this office, this night, and everyone in this room. Price swallowed. Yes, he said. Good, Vincent said. They moved toward the door, Marcus first, then Victoria, Vincent behind her, with the specific attentiveness of a man keeping his sister close without restraining her, which was its own kind of thing to witness. Audrey followed. In the elevator going down the main elevator, all of them together now, the service entrance no longer necessary, she stood in the corner and watched the floor numbers decrease and thought about her father. About the specific quality of his silences in the last years she had known him, which she had read as disappointment, and which she was now beginning to reread as grief, the grief of a man who knew what was coming, and had done everything he could to position the people he loved for what came after. He had positioned her here. She understood that now with a completeness she hadn't had before tonight. The job at McNally's arranged through a connection she'd thought was coincidence. The apartment on West 46th, the building with 2 exits that she'd thought she'd found herself. The 26 months of careful distance from anything that looked like her father's world. All of it arranged. All of it a kind of love that she had read as abandonment because it hadn't looked like love from the inside. She had been furious at a dead man for 2 years. She wasn't sure she was done being furious. But she understood now that fury and grief were not the same as the truth. And the truth was more complicated and more generous than she had allowed. The elevator reached the lobby. The security guard looked up from the desk when they came through, and Marcus produced something, a card, a document. Audrey didn't see what, and the guard nodded and looked back at his desk. The lobby doors opened onto 51st Street. The city hit her immediately, the cold and the noise and the indifferent brightness of it. Thomas had brought the car around and was double parked in front of the building with the engine running. Victoria stopped on the sidewalk. She turned and looked at Audrey, a sound like green wood splitting, and there was something in her expression that was different from everything she'd shown in the office, the anger, the control, the devastation. This was something plainer. You talked to me like I was a person, Victoria said. In that office. Not a problem to be managed. Audrey looked at her. You are a person. Most people who work for Vincent forget that. About anyone on the other side of something. She paused. Your father did that too. Talked to people like they were people. He had his failures, Audrey said. Everyone does. Victoria held her gaze for a moment. I'm sorry about pulling you into this. You didn't choose to be here. Neither did you, Audrey said. Not really. Victoria looked at her for a moment longer. Then she turned and got into the car. Audrey stood on the sidewalk. Vincent was beside her. She hadn't heard him come up. He stood close enough that she was aware of it, the warmth of him in the cold air, the specific physical presence of a man who had been through the same 12 hours she had and was still standing. Gerald Price, he said. What you said about him. About deserving better. What about it? I would have made a different call, he said. I know, but you were right, he said. He said it like it cost him something modest. He was used it. He's not someone who needs to disappear. She looked at him. Is that hard for you? Saying that? He considered the question, honestly, which she appreciated. A little, he said. Yes, it gets easier, she said. Reconsidering things if you practice. Something moved in his expression that she was beginning to recognize the very edge of something that wasn't quite a smile, the specific expression of a man who was not accustomed to being answered back and was, against his instincts, finding it something other than intolerable. Marcus said from the car, "We need to move." They both looked at the car. Neither of them moved immediately. What happens now? Audrey said. Now I have to deal with the actual damage. Victoria gets managed, she's family, which means this doesn't go where it would go if she were anyone else. Damien needs to understand what was done to him. The financial trail that Danny's been pulling apart needs to be closed. He paused. And someone tried to kill me yesterday, which, given everything that's happened in the last 12 hours, I have nearly lost track of. You haven't lost track, she said. No, he agreed. What about me? She said. She asked it evenly, not with anxiety, but with the specific practical need to understand what the next 24 hours looked like. He looked at her for a moment. The city moved around them. A cab went past. Someone laughed from an upper window somewhere. A siren spiraled up from the direction of 8th Avenue and then diminished. That, he said, depends on you. She held his gaze. You can go back to your apartment tonight, he said. I'll have people on the building discreet. You won't burn them this time, because they'll actually be good at it. Tomorrow, the threat is lower. In a week, it's manageable. In a month, he stopped. In a month, you can probably go back to McNally's and pull drafts for the man who holds his coffee wrong and pretend this never happened. Or she said. He looked at her. You said, or without saying it, she said. He was quiet for a moment, not avoiding the word, organizing around it. Or he said, you don't go back to pretending. You were right. Earlier, you were built for something, and you've been pretending you weren't. I can see it. He held her eyes. I knew your father for 22 years, and I can see it in every decision you made tonight. The way you moved, the way you read the room, the way you gave Price a way out that I wouldn't have given him, and were right about it. He paused. Your father spent his life building something, and then he spent the last hours of it trying to make sure you didn't inherit it. But what you do with what he built into you, that's not something he could control. That's yours. The city noise filled the space between them. I'm not asking you to join anything, he said. I'm not asking you to make a decision tonight. I'm saying the door is open, and what's behind it is he paused, and she heard him choose the word deliberately, real. Complicated, and it's not clean, and there are days it's genuinely terrible. But it's real. She looked at the car, at Thomas through the window, patient and watching. At Victoria in the back seat, her head turned away, looking at something only she could see. She looked back at Vincent. Tell me one thing, she said. Anything, he said, and she heard, under the word, that he meant it. My father, she said, the promise he asked you to make. Watching out for me, keeping me safe, was that all of it? Or was there something else he asked you for? Vincent held her gaze. She watched him decide, in real time, whether to give her the whole answer or the safe one. He gave her the whole answer. He asked me to watch over you, he said. And he asked me, a pause brief, the length of a breath drawn in and held, to make sure that when you were ready to come back to yourself, there was something worth coming back to. The word settled. She thought about her father at a kitchen table, at a grave in the rain, at every birthday Vincent had said he'd watched without her knowledge. She thought about a man who had loved her, by making sure she had a life beyond him, and who had also, apparently, made sure the life beyond him had a door in it. She felt the fury. She felt the grief. She felt underneath both of them something that she hadn't felt since she was 19 years old and standing in a room, watching her father explain a world she didn't want to be part of and couldn't stop finding fascinating. She felt alive, completely dangerously, irrevocably alive. Marcus said, from the car, with the quiet emphasis of a man saying something, for the third time, "We really need to go." Audrey looked at Vincent one more time. "I'm not making any decisions tonight," she said. "I know," he said, "but I'm getting in the car." "I know that too," he said, and there was nothing in his voice that was triumphant or satisfied or controlling. Just honest. She got in the car. Vincent got in after her, and Marcus pulled away from the curb, and the building on West 51st, her father's building, the building with the service elevator and the secondary exit and everything behind the door she'd stopped tracing at 21, disappeared into the city behind them. In the seat beside her, Victoria Callahan was looking at her hands. In the front seat, Marcus was already on the phone with Danny, getting the status of everything that still needed to be unwound. And Thomas, in the corner of the back seat on Victoria's other side, caught Audrey's eye across the car and gave her the very small nod of a man who has seen a great many things and has just added one more to the list, and found it, against considerable expectation, not the worst one. Car moved north through the city. It was 2:47 in the morning. Audrey Whitmore had not slept in 22 hours. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her father was still dead, and she was still furious about the things she was furious about. And the life she had built on West 46th was either behind her or ahead of her, and she didn't know which. And she was sitting in the back of a car with the most feared man on the East Coast, and his sister who had tried to destroy him. And she was against everything, okay. Not fine. Not resolved. Not at peace with any particular thing. But okay. Which was, she had learned a long time ago in a kitchen in Connecticut, with the radio on, sometimes the most you could honestly claim, and sometimes that was enough to keep moving. The city went past. She kept moving. They took Victoria to a house in Westchester. Not a facility, not a cell. A house, one of the legitimate properties that the Callahan family had held for 30 years, a colonial on 2 acres behind a stone wall that was unremarkable from the road and completely controlled from within. Vincent had called ahead from the car, and by the time they arrived at 4 in the morning, there were 2 people inside who Audrey understood, without being told, were medical rather than security. Someone had thought to put food on the table in the kitchen. Someone had thought to turn the heat up. These small things told her something about how Vincent operated that the 12 hours of crisis had not. Victoria didn't resist going in. She walked through the front door under her own power and stopped in the entry hall and looked at the house, the furniture she probably recognized. The particular smell of a place that had been in a family long enough to absorb it, and her shoulders dropped by about half an inch. A small thing, Audrey noticed it. Marcus stayed with the car. Thomas went inside with Vincent and his sister. Audrey stayed on the front step. She wasn't sure why. She just didn't go in. She sat down on the stone step and put her back against the doorframe and looked at the dark lawn, stretching toward the wall, and breathed the cold Westchester air that smelled nothing like Manhattan, and felt, for the first time in 24 hours, the full weight of her own body. Her feet hurt. She hadn't noticed until now. She had been wearing the same shoes she'd put on yesterday morning for a bar shift. Flat-soled, comfortable for standing behind a counter for 6 hours. Not designed for crossing 4 lanes of Manhattan traffic, or moving through dark alleys, or pressing herself against walls in service corridors. Her left heel had a blister she was only now registering. She looked at her hands again. Still, the shaking had stopped sometime between the 6th floor office and the car, and she wasn't sure exactly when. She heard the door open behind her and didn't turn around. Vincent sat down on the step beside her. Not close, not far, the specific distance of someone who understood that proximity was its own kind of communication and was being deliberate about it. They sat in silence for a moment. "She's going to be all right," he said. I know, Audrey said. How do you know? Because she's angry, Audrey said. People who've given up aren't angry. They're quiet. She paused. She's got a lot of angry left in her. That's something to work with. He was quiet. Are you going to press charges? She said. He looked at her sideways. Against my sister. She arranged a professional hit on you. She arranged it, he said. Damien didn't pull the trigger. It's not the legal standard. I'm not operating in the legal standard, he said, with the specific dry weight of a man stating a fact about his own life, without apology or drama. Then what standard are you operating in? He looked at the lawn for a moment. The one where I failed her first, he said. She didn't build that plan out of nothing. She built it out of 15 years of being kept outside a door she should have been allowed through. I did that. A pause. I thought I was doing the right thing. I was sure of it. And I was wrong. Audrey said nothing. Your father used to say, Vincent continued, that the most dangerous thing a man in our position could be was certain. Because certainty stopped you, looking for what you missed. He exhaled. He was right about most things. I should have listened more. He wasn't right about everything, Audrey said. No. He kept things from me that I deserved to know. Yes. He made decisions about my life without asking me. Yes. And he was wrong about that, she said. Even if he thought he was protecting me, even if it came from love, he was wrong. Yes, Vincent said. And he said it without qualifying it, without adding but or however, or you have to understand the position he was in, and the absence of the qualifier was the most honest thing he'd done. She looked at the lawn. Tell me about him, she said. The parts I didn't know, the parts you knew. He was quiet for a moment, and she heard him organizing something, not deciding whether to tell her, she thought, but deciding where to start. He was funny, Vincent said. People don't think about that. They think about Richard Whitmore, and they think about the power and the reputation and the specific way he walked into a room. They don't think about the fact that he was the funniest man in any room he walked into when he wanted to be. A pause. He used to do this thing. He'd find the most junior person in a meeting and he'd direct a question at them that none of the senior people could answer, just to watch the room shift. Not cruel, just he wanted to see who was paying attention and who was performing. Audrey almost smiled. She recognized that. She had seen it at a school parent-teacher conference when she was 9, her father directing a question at the student-teacher in the back of the room while the head teacher floundered. He missed you, Vincent said. I want you to know that specifically. Not in the abstract way that people miss things they've given up. He missed you the way you miss a limb, something that was part of how you functioned and now isn't, and you keep reaching for it, and it isn't there. He paused. He talked about you, like you were still in the room, like you hadn't gone anywhere. He'd say Audrey thinks, or Audrey would say, and then tell me what you would think or say. And he was usually right, which told me he'd been paying more attention to who you were than you probably knew. Her throat was tight. She didn't try to talk through it. He was also, Vincent said, more quietly, genuinely afraid of what would happen to you if you stayed. That wasn't performance. I've seen that man perform fear he was not performing. He lay awake over it. He talked to me about it at 2 in the morning more than once, which was not something Richard Whitmore did. He did not discuss his fears at 2 in the morning. A pause. He discussed yours. She pressed her lips together. He wanted you to have a life that was clean, Vincent said. He knew what his life had cost. He'd seen what it cost the people around him. He'd watched men he respected become things they couldn't have predicted at 20 years old, and he looked at you, and he saw something that hadn't been shaped yet. That was still entirely its own. His voice was careful. He wanted to keep it that way. He was wrong about whether he had the right to make that choice. The wanting was real. Audrey looked at the stone wall at the edge of the property. Her father had loved her in a language she'd spent 2 years translating as silence. She understood that now. Understanding it did not mean it stopped hurting. She was not sure it would ever stop hurting, and she was, for the first time, making her peace with the idea that some things were not supposed to stop. Thank you, she said. For what? For keeping the promise. For watching over me even when I didn't know. Even when I would have been furious about it if I had. She looked at him. I am furious about it. But I'm all she stopped. Grateful, he said. I was going to say something less uncomplicated than that, she said. I know, he said. But that's what it is. She looked at him. Sal. He was looking at the lawn with the same settled attention he brought to everything. The patience of a man who had learned that things revealed themselves if you gave them enough time. What happens now, she said. With all of it, Damien. The financial investigation. The people who were running the network. He said, Danny closed the third layer last night, just before everything in the Bronx. The holding company traces back to a man named Carver Peripheral, an opportunist who saw Victoria moving money and inserted himself as a facilitator. He's not dangerous, he's greedy, which is almost the same thing, but easier to manage. And Damien. Damien is going to spend a long time earning back what he cost, Vincent said. He knows that. I think he was waiting for someone to tell him what the cost was he'd been carrying it, and not knowing the number, which is its own kind of punishment. He paused. He was used. That's real. It doesn't erase what he did. But it changes what happens next. Victoria. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Victoria is going to be here for a while. She needs to not be alone, and she needs to not be in the organization, and she needs time to work through what she built and why. He paused. After that, we'll see. You're going to bring her in, Audrey said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. Eventually, she said, when things settle, you're going to open the door she was standing outside for 15 years. He said nothing. I'm not criticizing, she said. I think it's right. I think she deserves it. I think you both lost something that you don't have to keep losing. She paused. I want you to actually do it, not decide to do it, and then find reasons to delay. He held her gaze. Something moved in his face, not defensiveness, which she might have expected, but something more like recognition. The look of a man being told a truth about himself by someone who had no particular reason to be careful with it. I'll do it, he said. She believed him. Thomas drove her back to Manhattan as the sky went gray with early morning. He didn't talk, which she appreciated. He put the heat on in the car and found a radio station that played old songs and kept the volume low, and she sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway and let her mind go quiet for the first time in 24 hours. He pulled up in front of her building on West 46th at 6:42 in the morning. She got out and then bent back down to the window. Thomas. He looked at her. My father came to Vincent a month before he died, she said. You told me that. What else did he do? Thomas was quiet for a moment. He made arrangements, he said carefully. For after. For the people he was leaving behind. For me specifically. Yes, the job at McNally's. Yes, the apartment. She nodded slowly. She had known it, had assembled it in the car in Westchester, but having it confirmed was different from knowing it. Did he know, she said, that it would eventually come apart? That I'd end up, she gestured generally at the last 24 hours. Thomas looked at the steering wheel for a moment, then at her. He said, and this is a direct quote, because he said it to me personally and I have not forgotten it. He said she'll hold the wall as long as she can and then her instincts will take over. And when that happens, I want the person she ends up standing next to be someone worth standing next to. Audrey stood on the sidewalk in the gray morning air and felt the sentence settle into her. Her father, at the end of his life, making arrangements. Not controlling her. Not directing her back into a world she'd left. Setting up the circumstance splitting. Setting up the circumstance in which, if her instincts ran hot, if she saw something she couldn't look away from the person she ended up next to, would be someone he trusted. It was manipulation. She was clear-eyed about that. It was a dead man moving pieces on a board he could no longer see. It was also love. She was equally clear-eyed about that. Both things were true, and neither one canceled the other, and that, she was beginning to understand, was the most honest thing she could say about Richard Whitmore. Thank you, Thomas, she said. Get some sleep, he said. You've earned it. She went inside. She slept for 11 hours. She woke at 6 in the evening to 4 missed calls, 1 from Colin at the bar, 2 from a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be Marcus's, 1 from Vincent. She listened to Vincent's message, which was 40 seconds long, and said, in summary, Victoria was stable. Damien had given a full account to Thomas. Carver had been dealt with through channels she didn't need the details of. And the situation was contained was the word he used, with the specific weight of a man who knew that contained was not the same as resolved, but was the best available word. He also said, at the end of the message, without preamble, the door is open if you want to talk. Not about the organization, just talk. She listened to that part twice. She called Colin first. He picked up on the second ring and said, "You're not dead." "I'm not dead." "Good. You're on the schedule for Thursday." "Colin, Thursday," he said. "You can tell me whatever you want or nothing at all, but you're on the schedule for Thursday, and the Budweiser sign is still broken and misses. Kowalski asked about you this morning." She felt something in her chest that was warm and uncomplicated in a way that very little had been for the last 26 hours. "I'll be there Thursday," she said. She made herself eggs and ate standing at the counter because she was too tired to sit at a table, and the eggs were slightly overcooked because she'd been staring at the wall instead of the pan, and she ate them anyway because she was hungry enough that it didn't matter. She thought about what Thomas had said in the car. She thought about what Vincent had said on the step in Westchester. She thought about her father. At 2 a.m, in a room she'd never seen talking about his fears to the only person he'd trusted with them. She had been so angry at his silence that she had never fully considered what it cost him to maintain it. She washed the pan and put it away and stood at her kitchen window and looked at the brick wall that had been her view for 14 months and thought, I chose this wall. I chose it specifically. I wanted nothing to look at. She understood that now for what it had been. She called Vincent the next morning. He picked up immediately, which told her he'd been awake. Damien, she said, I want to talk to him. A pause. Why? Because he knew my father. Because he was used the same way I was kept in a position. Because someone else decided what he deserved to know. Because I think there are things he can tell me about the last few years that nobody else can. She paused. And because he looked at me in that alley in the Bronx, like he expected me to be angry at him. And I'm not. And I think he should know that. Silence. All right, Vincent said, today. This afternoon, he said. I'll arrange it, she thought he would say something else. He didn't. She was starting to understand that about him. The things he chose not to say were as deliberate as the things he said, and learning to read the silence was its own work. Vincent, she said. Yes, the message you left. The part at the end. A beat. I heard it, she said. That's all. She hung up. Damien Blackwood was at a property in Queens, not the Westchester house. Somewhere more modest. A row house on a tree-lined street that was so ordinary it disappeared into its own block. Marcus led her in and led her to a back room where Damien was sitting at a table with a cup of coffee and the specific stillness of a man who had been sitting in one place for a long time, with nothing to do but think. His face was worse in daylight. The swollen eye had gone purple and yellow at the edges. Cut on his lip had been closed with 2 small strips of tape. He looked at her when she came in. Marcus left them alone. She sat across from him and looked at his face and said, That looks like it hurt. It did, he said. Are you all right? He seemed surprised by the question. He looked at his coffee cup. I've been better. A pause. I've been worse, honestly. Just not recently. She nodded. She waited. I owed you an apology, he said without being prompted. Before anything else. What I was part of the attempt on Vincent, the exposure of your location, you were never supposed to be in it. You were collateral because of me. He looked at her. I'm sorry, you didn't know about me, she said. No, but I should have asked more questions before I took anyone's money. He said it with the specific flatness of a man who had been over this ground enough times in his own head that saying it out loud was just confirming what he already knew. I let myself be told a story that I wanted to be true, and I didn't look hard enough at whether it was. What was the story? He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. That Vincent was the problem. That the organization would be better, cleaner, more careful without him. That Elena, he stopped. His jaw worked. That Elena would have wanted it. Wanted change. Victoria used Elena's name. Her memory. He shook his head. That was the hook. That was what got me past my own better judgment. Elena, his wife, 4 years dead. I'm sorry, Audrey said. and she meant it the way she had meant it to Victoria, not as a formality, but as a real thing. He looked at her. You knew her? No, I only know what Vincent told me. He stopped. He looked at the wall. She was the best person in any room she was ever in. Better than Vincent, better than me, better than all of it. A pause. Victoria knew that. She knew what her sister's memory meant to me. And she used it. Something moved through his expression that was not quite anger and not quite grief. I don't entirely blame her. She was in real pain, and she made real choices out of it. But she used Elena, and that I can't, he stopped. You don't have to reconcile everything right now, Audrey said. He looked at her. You sound like your father. People keep saying that. Is that a problem? She considered. I'm still deciding, she said. He almost smiled. The left side of his face, the one that wasn't swollen, shifted into something that was adjacent to it. He talked about you, Damien said. Richard, he talked about you the way people talk about something they are simultaneously very proud of and very worried about. He paused. He worried that sending you away was the right thing done wrong. That you'd read the absence as rejection. He said I remember this specifically. He said she'll think I gave her up when I was actually giving her everything I had left to give. The apartment was very quiet. He was right, she said. I did read it that way. Are you still reading it that way? She looked at the table. No, she said. Not entirely. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't cost me. That the years didn't cost me. That, coming to the conclusion he loved me the way he did it, doesn't mean I have to be completely at peace with how he did it. Damien nodded slowly. Fair, he said. Did he say anything else? Toward the end. Anything I should know. Damien looked at his coffee. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer. He said he was tired of being afraid, Damien said. He said he'd been afraid his whole life, afraid of the wrong move, afraid of the competition, afraid of the cost to the people around him. And he said that the thing he'd been most afraid of always was you looking at him and seeing the truth of what he was. He paused. And then he said he hoped he used that word, hoped, which was not a word Richard Whitmore used. Often he hoped that when you understood the full picture, you'd be able to hold both things. What he was and what he tried to be for you. She sat with that for a while. Outside, a car went past. Someone down the street called a name and a door closed. I can hold both things, she said. Good, Damien said. He deserved someone who could. She stayed for another hour. They talked about smaller things, Elena, a little, when Damien chose to. Her father's habits, the specific texture of the world she'd been born into, as described by someone who had lived in it for 30 years and seen it from an angle she hadn't. She asked questions she'd been carrying without knowing she was carrying them, and he answered them honestly, including the ones Aunt Sylvain was unflattering to himself, or to the organization, or to the dead man who had shaped them both. When she left, she shook his hand at the door. He looked at her handshake and then at her face. You're going to be around, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what that looks like yet, she said. But yes, he nodded. Good, he said. Vincent needs someone who'll tell him when he's wrong. Thomas does that. Thomas is 61 years old and has been doing it for so long that Vincent has learned to hear it as background noise. He held her gaze. You he still listens to. She walked back to the car. Marcus had waiting for her and thought about that. She went back to work on Thursday. Colin had fixed the Budweiser sign. She noticed it immediately when she came in. The neon was steady, no flicker. She stopped inside the door and looked at it. Fixed it Tuesday, Colin said from behind the bar. Don't make a thing of it. She didn't make a thing of it. She tied on her apron and went behind the bar and started checking the taps, and misses. Kowalski came in at 4:30 as she always did and ordered her usual and said, You look different. I got some sleep, Audrey said. Not that kind of different, Mrs. Kowalski, who was 73, and had been coming to McNally's draft since before Audrey had been born, looked at her with the particular perceptiveness of someone who had been watching people for a very long time. You look like you decided something. Maybe, Audrey said. Well, whatever it was, it suits you. She picked up her drink. You were too careful before. Nice, but careful, like you were watching yourself from somewhere outside. Audrey pulled a draft for the man in the cable-knit sweater and didn't say anything. She worked the shift. She poured drinks and made change. She poured drinks and listened to two men argue about something that had happened in an office upstairs in their building, and said the right things at the right times, and cleaned the taps at 8 o'clock and wiped down the bar. Ordinary things. The specific rhythm of a life she had chosen. At 8:45, she looked up and saw Vincent Callahan standing on the other side of the bar. He was not in his dark suit. He was in a jacket and an open collar, and he looked, in the bar's dim light, less like the most feared man on the East Coast, and more like a man who had driven somewhere he wasn't sure he should have driven. She looked at him for a moment. "You're not really a neighborhood pub type," she said. "No," he agreed. "How did you find this place?" "I've known where you work for 26 months, he said, with the dry specificity of a man stating a fact he was not proud of but was not going to pretend didn't exist. She sets a glass on the bar in front of him. He looked at it. "What is that?" "Whatever it is, it's what you're having." She poured him something amber and slid it across. "Sit down." He sat. She went back to work. She didn't ignore him. She was aware of him the way she was aware of everything in her bar, the specific inventory of what was where and what it meant, but she finished the work she was doing first. She cleared 2 glasses, restocked the rail, told Colin she was taking 10 minutes, and came out from behind the bar and sat on the stool beside him. "How's Victoria?" she said. "Better," he said. "She ate a full meal last night. Thomas says she's starting to talk more." He paused. "She asked about you." "What did she ask?" "She wanted to know if you were all right. Whether the explosion in the Bronx, whether you were hurt." Audrey looked at the bar top. "Tell her I'm fine." "I will. And tell her she stopped." She considered what she wanted to say. "Tell her the conversation we had in that office. What I said. I meant it. Not as a tactic. I meant it." He looked at her. "I know you did. I want her to know. I'll tell her." They sat for a moment. The bar had its usual Thursday evening rhythm, not loud, not empty, the murmur of a place where people came to be around other people without being required to talk to them. "The organization," Audrey said. "The full picture of it. What it actually is, not what people say it is from outside." She looked at him. "I want to understand it. Not to be part of it necessarily, but to understand it. My father built something, and I spent 2 years pretending I didn't come from it. I'm done pretending." He held her gaze. "That's a long conversation," he said. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then there are things in it that you won't like." "I know. Things your father did that." "I know," she said. "I said I can hold both things." "I meant it." He looked at her with the specific attention she had come to recognize, not the assessment of the first night at Caruso's, not the calculation of a man reading threat or asset. Something less guarded than that. Something that had been built, incrementally, out of the last 4 days. "My father told you to make sure there was something worth coming back to," she said. "If I came back." "Yes." Was that always, did he mean the organization? Was it about the organization? He was quiet for long enough that she knew he was being careful with his answer. "No," he said. "I don't think that was what he meant." She looked at him. He looked back. "He said it to me," Vincent said, "after he told me about you. Not in the way a man talks about his daughter's career or her safety. The way he talked about you." He stopped. He picked up the glass she'd poured and held it without drinking it. "He talked about you the way people talk, about the thing they are most proud of in their life. The whole conversation every time came back to you. Your instincts, your mind. The specific way you'd reasoned through something as a teenager that had surprised him. The way you'd said something to him at 20 that he was still thinking about." He set the glass down. "When he asked me to make sure there was something worth coming back to, I think he was talking about me." The bar noise continued around them, indifferent and continuous. She looked at Vincent Callahan, the most feared man on the East Coast, sitting on a wobbling bar stool in a pub with a newly fixed neon sign, saying something her dead father had arranged for him to say, in a way that was both calculated and entirely sincere, which was the most Richard Whitmore thing she had ever heard. She laughed. It surprised both of them. Not a polite laugh, a real one. The specific involuntary laugh that came from the intersection of absurdity and recognition, the kind that happened when something was exactly as ridiculous and exactly as true as it appeared to be. He looked at her. My father, she said, when she could, set all of this up. All of it. The job, the apartment, you watching over me, and then apparently you, specifically you, being the person I ended up next to. Yes, he said. He was unbelievable, she said. He was, Vincent agreed. There was something in his voice that was almost fond. He had no right, she said. No, Vincent said. He didn't. He did it anyway. He did. She shook her head. She was still half laughing, which was not an emotion she'd expected to feel tonight. And underneath it was something more complicated, the grief and the fury, and the complicated love for a dead man, who had arranged even his absence with the specific thoroughness of someone who never stopped working, and all of it was present at the same time, and she was not trying to sort it out or resolve it. She just let it be what it was. I'm not ready for anything, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not making decisions tonight. I'm not committing to anything. I know, he said. I'm working out who I am after 2 years of pretending I was someone simpler. That takes time. I know that too. And if you do anything, she said, anything at all, that makes me feel like I'm being managed or handled or protected without my knowledge. You'll tell me, he said. I'll do more than tell you, she said. Corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite the smile she'd seen the almost version of in various unguarded moments. Closer to it now. I believe you, he said. She looked at him for a moment. She thought about the woman who had come out from behind this bar 5 days ago and crossed the street because her instincts took over and she hadn't had time to talk herself out of it. That woman had spent 2 years building walls and had watched them come down in a single afternoon, spatting, not because someone knocked them down, but because she had looked through a window and seen something she could not look away from and had made a choice. She was still that woman. She was also something more than that woman, or something for fully herself, which was different from more. The bar stool beside Vincent was empty. She got up from it and went back behind the bar because she was working and the shift wasn't over. She pulled a draft for someone at the far end and made change and wiped the rail. She came back and stood on her side of the bar across from him. You want to know something, she said. Yes, he said. The morning after I started this job, first day of the second week, I came in and there was a man at the end of the bar different from the regulars, wrong kind of watch for the neighborhood, holding his coffee cup wrong. She looked at him. Your man, he stilled. I didn't say anything, she said. I watched him for 2 weeks. I figured out the rotation. There were 3 of them, cycling through. One would come in, one would be across the street, one would be somewhere else. Professional enough that most people wouldn't notice. I noticed in 4 days. She held his gaze. I chose not to burn them. He was looking at her very steadily. Because part of me, she said, the part that was my father's daughter, no matter how much I tried to be something else, part of me understood what they were and what they meant. And I chose not to disrupt it. A pause. I was angry about it. But I chose not to disrupt it. He said nothing. I'm telling you that, she said, because I want you to know that I made that choice. Not you. Not my father, me. She looked at him clearly. And I'm capable of making the next one too, whatever it is. He held her gaze for a long moment. In the bar's dim light, his face showed her something she hadn't quite seen on it before, stripped of the authority and the calculation and the controlled distance, stripped of the management of a man who ran complicated things and had learned to run himself the same way. Just a man sitting at a bar listening. I know, he said quietly. I think I've known that since Caruso's. Good, she said. She moved down the bar to answer someone who needed a refill. She poured the drink and made the change and listened to the bar do what bars did in the evening, the slow accumulation of warmth, the particular human sound of people in the same room, choosing, for a couple of hours, not to be alone. Came back. He was still there. She picked up a glass and started polishing it, a habit, the thing her hands did when she was thinking, and looked at him. You want to know the last thing my father said to me, she said, before I left. If you want to tell me. She looked at the glass. He said we were standing outside, early, morning. My bag was already in the car. He looked at me and he said, she stopped. She held the memory carefully the way you held things that had been handled too many times. He said, you're going to be fine. Not because the world is going to be easy. Because you're built right. She set the glass down. I spent 2 years trying to figure out what that meant. Whether it was a compliment or a prophecy or just something fathers said. She looked up. I think I understand it now. What does it mean? He said. It means he knew me, she said. He knew what I could take and what I was made of, and he trusted it. Even when he made the wrong choices about how to show that trust. She looked at Vincent. He trusted it, and he trusted you to be there when it came out. The bar moved around them. Glasses and voices, and the specific, comfortable noise of a place that had been there long enough to have a personality. Vincent picked up his glass. He looked at it for a moment. He drank. He set it down. For what it's worth, he said. He was right. She looked at him. You're built right, he said. It was quiet, and it was direct, and it had no performance in it. She held his gaze. Outside the window, Manhattan continued its permanent, relentless, completely indifferent existence, the cabs and the foot traffic, and the specific brightness of a city that never fully went dark. 5 days ago, she had looked through this window and seen a man she didn't know with a scope trained on his chest and made a decision in under 3 seconds that had cost her the life she'd built and given her back something she hadn't known she'd lost. She did not regret it. She would not have said that 4 days ago. She would not have been sure, but she stood behind her bar on a Thursday evening with her hands steady and her feet aching from a blister that was finally starting to heal, and she was clear. She did not regret it. Same time tomorrow, she said. He looked at her. Something in his face shifted the almost smile, becoming something more complete. Not large, just real. Yes, he said. She picked up the next glass. The bar carried on around her, warm and ordinary, and exactly what she had chosen, and beneath the ordinary surface of it, the pulled drafts, and the familiar faces, and the Budweiser sign that was finally fixed. Something else was also present. Something that had been dormant for 2 years, and was now awake, and would not go back to sleep. She was Richard Whitmore's daughter. She had always been Richard Whitmore's daughter. And now, for the first time, she was also entirely, completely, irreversibly herself. That was enough. That was, as it turned out, everything.